In this episode, I will be looking at the great power competition in Africa, how this has helped propel Africa into an influential region in recent years with the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, as China, Russia, United States, Turkey, and other knocking.
Great power competition, a classic aspect of international relations, is based on traditional power politics, particularly a permanent contest for supremacy regionally or globally. The issue of great power competition is particularly relevant in the context of China's rise, the relative decline of the United States, and Russia's resurgence. Three distinctive elements, power, security, and status, are the most significant stakes in geopolitical competition. Other factors, such as neighborhoods and sub-region, may affect the quest for great power status. In Africa, rivalry and competition for influence and resources between the European Union, the United States, Russia, and China are occurring. Throughout history, Africa has attracted significant international interest because of its natural resources and economic potential. Additionally, the geostrategic location of Africa is of particular interest since it is the continent best positioned geographically in relation to the larger consumption centers of the world. Africa has, differently from the other continents, a positive demographic bonus with growing consumer power. Great power competition in Africa has had several positive consequences. African countries have become attractive for foreign direct investment, FDI, due to their demographic bonus, growing economic markets, and infrastructure opportunities. China has been very active in the continent since the early 2000s, with a growing presence through the BRI, focusing mainly on ports, railways, and energy facilities. Military cooperation has been an area of particular interest, with the United States having the most significant military presence in the region, 17. China has been involved in peacekeeping missions in Africa and recently established its first overseas military base in Djibouti. Russia, which has had an active presence since the Soviet Union period, also has significant cooperation agreements with many African countries. With African abundance in natural resources, oil, gas, minerals, and agricultural commodities, access to such goods has been an essential driver for competition between the great powers. All players, Russia, China, the EU, and the US, have sought cooperation agreements to secure access to resources and diverse energy sources. Africa has approximately 90% of the entire global supply of platinum and cobalt, half of the world's gold, 2/3 of the manganese, and 35% of the uranium. Africa has nearly 75% of the world's coltan, used in electronic devices, particularly cell phones. Chinese aid programs, sometimes criticized for lack of transparency, have provided African countries with grants and loans to make improvements in areas including agriculture, education, infrastructure, and healthcare. Diplomatic engagement with Africa has grown. Both China and the United States have launched initiatives to enhance diplomatic cooperation with African countries. China has established and developed the relevance of its Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC 18, and the United States has its own frameworks, like Prosper Africa, to promote economic growth and improved governance. China adopts a no-strings-attached approach in Africa, with a particular focus on economic development and infrastructure, while Western countries seek to emphasize governance and human rights. The Chinese strategy has allowed African countries to implement projects faster to address current issues and challenges. African countries can leverage this great power dynamic based on their domestic interests and long-term strategies to attract investment, technology transfer, and more rapid economic development. The effective determination of the national interest with an effective strategy should be the main driving force for pursuing a thriving situation. great power competition in Africa reflects the broader global shifts in geopolitics and economic interests. It presents opportunities for African nations to benefit from foreign investment and partnerships, but also poses challenges in managing competing interests and ensuring sustainable development. China and the EU are both active in Africa with different motivations and approaches. However, European ties are much older than Chinese. Africa's historical relationship with European countries derives from a past of exploitation of the continent and divisions that have been difficult for African countries to overcome. The European colonial history in Africa has led to requests for reparations, mainly arising from slavery and exploitation of the continent. Over the last decades, the relationship between the EU and Africa has focused more on development aid and cooperation in governance, sustainable development, trade, and development through various economic partnership agreements. China's engagement in Africa does not share the negative legacy and background of the European countries. Chinese engagement has been driven primarily by infrastructure investment and resource extraction. However, it should be emphasized that China considers infrastructure investment as the essential source for more secure economic growth, based on a Chinese proverb which states, "If you want to get rich, build roads first." This adage reaffirms the Chinese perspective that infrastructure building is essential for growth and for building a positive legacy from the Chinese presence in Africa. China's presence has challenged the EU's traditional influence in Africa by offering an alternative to conventional Western partners. For the best interest of Africa, the EU and China, however, should engage in more development projects in the continent with a win-win perspective, which would significantly contribute to the continent's development. Both China and the US have been actively engaged in Africa. The US has focused primarily on private sector investment and market access for US companies. Additionally, the United States has launched initiatives like the African Growth and Opportunity Act to provide duty-free access to the American market for some African products. To counter the BRI, the US has also been increasing efforts to enhance its diplomatic presence and increase US-Africa trade and investment ties. It has also implemented initiatives like the Young African Leaders Initiative, YALI, to build relationships with African leaders and slow down the influence of Confucius institutes. Poverty, unemployment, and income inequality are still challenges Africa faces, particularly in securing inclusive development. Many African countries still face governance and stability issues, with weak institutions and corruption leading to political and economic instability. A fragile environment for transparency and the rule of law is challenging African nations. This still need to overcome to achieve greater stability. Additionally, the continent still faces challenges related to inadequate infrastructure, transportation, energy, and telecommunication, which limit economic growth and development. China has been responsible for developing several significant African infrastructure projects, particularly ports, airports, roads, and power plants. Such projects address Africa's most pressing challenge: connectivity within the continent. China has engaged actively with African countries on technology transfer and capacity-building projects in telecommunications, renewable energy and information technology, mobile networks, and enhanced communication infrastructure. China became Africa's largest trading partner in 2009, with an ever-increasing trade volume, with Chinese demand for commodities, oil, minerals, and agricultural products contributing enormously to expanded trade, job creation, and economic growth. Though criticized at times for causing environmental degradation and resource depletion, Chinese investments have proven to be more positive than negative in terms of their results in the continent. Chinese companies have invested in mining activities, particularly in copper, cobalt, gold, and iron ore, particularly in Congo, Zambia, and South Africa. Africa has approximately 90% of the entire global supply of platinum and cobalt, half of the world's gold, 2/3 of the manganese, and 35% of the uranium. Africa has nearly 75% of the world's coltan, used in electronic devices, particularly cell phones. 21. Of course, funds flow as certain milestones are reached, but China does not want to convert Africa to its values. There is, however, one principle on which China wants to convert Africa. Trade, in reality, is China's most extraordinary soft and hard power. Additionally, China can supply whatever is necessary to Africa and the world through enhanced connectivity, infrastructure, railway development, and industrialization in Africa, and by encouraging companies from both sides to explore more ways to create wealth. China's presence in Africa has been more positive than negative. Its investments on the continent have created a positive legacy in terms of infrastructure, which should serve the countries involved and help to achieve greater financial results. China has not imposed projects, debt entrapment, or its ideology on the countries where it has developed projects and joint activities. However, the narrative perpetrated by Western countries may lead to a different yet equivocated perspective. By stimulating investments in infrastructure, China projects its belief that infrastructure projects are the essential element for obtaining an improved level of development and growth. This is one of Africa's best results from this great power competition. Hopefully, we have informed you as to the reason why great power competition in Africa has woken up the continent. Let us know what you think about this, and if China has made any significant impact in your country. If you are new to our channel, we will encourage you to subscribe and share the video with your network and keep the conversation going.